Marriage is built on trust and respect, but some lines can't be uncrossed. The day my husband Brandon fired his mother's caregiver without consulting me was the day I realized our vows had become empty promises. What he didn't expect was that, instead of doing his dirty work, I'd be the one walking out the door. Sometimes the people who should love you the most are the ones who understand you the least. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My mother-in-law Eleanor's health had been declining for nearly 3 years. What started as occasional memory lapses had progressed into full-blown dementia, transforming the once vibrant, independent woman into someone who needed round-the-clock care. When it became clear she couldn't live alone anymore, my husband Brandon insisted we move her into our home rather than place her in a facility. "She's my mother, Melissa," he'd said with that determined look I'd once found endearing. "I won't abandon her in some institution where she'll be just another patient." I understood his devotion. Family loyalty was one of the qualities that had drawn me to Brandon when we met 8 years ago. But what he didn't acknowledge was that neither of us had the training or the time to provide the specialized care Eleanor needed. I run my own small accounting firm, and tax season demands 16-hour workdays. Brandon's position as regional director for a pharmaceutical company meant frequent travel. Despite this reality, he somehow convinced himself we could handle everything on our own. The first month was a disaster. Eleanor wandered outside at 3 a.m. in her nightgown during a snowstorm. She left burners on constantly. Twice, she didn't recognize Brandon, becoming hysterical when this stranger approached her. I found her crying in the bathtub, fully clothed, unable to remember how to turn on the water. That's when I put my foot down. "We need professional help, Brandon. This isn't working for anyone. Not for Eleanor, not for us." After weeks of arguments, Brandon finally agreed to hire a caregiver. That's how Maria Sanchez came into our lives. With 15 years of experience, specializing in dementia care, Maria was nothing short of a miracle worker. She moved into our guest house and established routines that gave Eleanor stability. She knew exactly how to redirect Eleanor's confusion without causing distress. For the first time in months, we could breathe. "Your mother ate her entire dinner tonight," Maria would report with a gentle smile. "And she remembered to call you Brandon twice today." These small victories meant everything. Eleanor's condition still progressed, but the sharp edges of her decline were softened by Maria's expertise and compassion. Our home found a new equilibrium, and I was able to focus on my work again without the constant worry that something terrible would happen while I was gone. But then, the pharmaceutical company Brandon worked for announced layoffs. His position was safe, but his salary took a 30% cut. We would manage, my business was steady, but it meant tightening our belts. "We need to look at where we can cut expenses," Brandon said one night as we reviewed our finances at the kitchen table. His eyes kept returning to one particular line item, Maria's salary. "Maria is non-negotiable," I said firmly. "She's the reason your mother is stable." Brandon didn't push the issue that night, but I noticed how he began scrutinizing Maria's work. Suddenly, the woman who had been our saving grace was being picked apart for insignificant things. "Why is Mom wearing the blue sweater? She hates blue. The house smells like those Mexican spices again. Mom can't stand strong smells. Did you see how late Maria slept in today? She didn't start with Mom until after 8. What Brandon conveniently forgot was that his mother had specifically requested the blue sweater that morning, that Eleanor had actually complimented Maria's cooking the previous night, and that Maria had been up until 3 a.m. because Eleanor had experienced severe sundowning and couldn't sleep. The tension came to a head on a Wednesday afternoon. I had just finished a virtual meeting with an important client when Brandon stormed into my home office, his face flushed with anger. "I caught Maria on her phone while Mom was napping," he announced like he'd uncovered a criminal conspiracy. "We're paying her to work, not to text her friends. I took a deep breath. Brandon, Maria is on call 24/7. She's entitled to use her phone during downtime. Your mother naps for 2 hours every afternoon. Should Maria just stare at the wall during that time? We're paying her a small fortune. I expect her full attention to be on my mother. That's unreasonable, and you know it. Our argument escalated until we were both saying things we'd regret. In retrospect, I should have seen what was coming, but I was blindsided when Brandon lowered his voice and said, I fired her this morning. She has until Friday to move out. The room seemed to tilt. You did what? Without even discussing it with me? It's my mother, my house, my decision, he said with a finality that sent a chill through me. And what's your plan for Eleanor's care? I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. Brandon looked away, unable to meet my eyes. You'll have to cut back at work. We can't afford luxuries anymore. That's when I realized what was really happening. Brandon hadn't just fired Maria. He'd decided that my career, my business that I'd built from nothing over a decade, was a luxury that could be sacrificed. Never mind that my income was nearly equal to his, even after his recent cut. Never mind that I'd spent years building a reputation and a client base. In Brandon's mind, I would simply step into Maria's role because, after all, taking care of his mother was now my responsibility as his wife. You need to call Maria and fix this, I said, my voice deadly calm. Apologize, offer her job back, and we'll pretend this moment of insanity never happened. Brandon crossed his arms. I'm not calling her. In fact, I need you to handle the final. Paperwork and payment on Friday. I'll be in Chicago for the sales conference. The audacity of it struck me like a physical blow. Not only had he unilaterally made this life-altering decision, but he expected me to clean up his mess while he conveniently disappeared for the weekend. I stared at this man I'd loved for 8 years, trying to reconcile the partner I thought I had with the person standing before me. Something fundamental had shifted, revealing a selfishness and disregard that I couldn't ignore. I see, I said quietly, more to myself than to him. Brandon must have mistaken my calm for acceptance, because he nodded with satisfaction before, adding, I know it'll be an adjustment, but we'll figure it out. Family comes first. As he walked out of my office, I sat motionless, the weight of what had just happened settling over me. In that moment, I understood with perfect clarity that the respect I thought was mutual in our marriage had been an illusion. A decision had been made, but it wouldn't be the one Brandon expected. By Friday morning, when Brandon was boarding his flight to Chicago, I had already set my own plan in motion, one that would change everything. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I never imagined my marriage would reach this breaking point, but to understand how we got here, you need to know our history. Brandon and I met at a charity fundraiser in Boston 9 years ago. I was there representing my fledgling accounting firm, hoping to network with potential clients. He was there because his pharmaceutical company was a major sponsor. When our eyes met across the room, it was one of those moments that seems too perfect to be real. Brandon Patterson was charismatic, driven, and came from what he called Old New England stock, a family with deep roots and traditional values. I was the first-generation college graduate who had built my business from a card table in my studio apartment. On paper, we might have seemed mismatched, but we balanced each other perfectly. Or so I thought. You're the most independent woman I've ever met, he told me on our third date. It's refreshing to be with someone who doesn't need rescuing. What I didn't realize then was that Brandon had been raised with very specific ideas about family roles, ideas that remained dormant during our early relationship, but would eventually surface with devastating clarity. Brandon was the only son in a family of 4 children. His father, Richard, was a stern, emotionally distant surgeon who expected perfection from his children, particularly his son. His mother, Eleanor, had been a high school English teacher before giving up her career. To raise their family, she devoted herself completely to her children, especially Brandon, whom Richard had designated as the man of the house whenever he was away on medical conferences. "My mother sacrificed everything for us," Brandon would say with a blend of pride and obligation in his voice. That's what real love looks like. Even during our dating years, I noticed how Brandon called his mother every Sunday without fail, how he consulted her on major decisions, how he spoke about her with a reverence that bordered on idolization. I found it endearing, evidence of his capacity for loyalty and devotion. What I failed to recognize was the undercurrent beneath this devotion, a deeply ingrained belief that a woman's highest calling was self-sacrifice for her family. This belief had shaped him far more profoundly than I understood. "My mom could have been department chair," he once mentioned casually. "She was offered the position twice, but she turned it down because Dad thought it would take too much time away from us kids." The way he said it, with pride rather than regret, should have been my first clue. As for me, I came from a completely different world. My parents had divorced when I was 12, and my mother raised me and my brother on her own, working 2 jobs to keep us fed and housed. She taught me that independence wasn't just a virtue, it was survival. "Never put yourself in a position where you have to depend on someone else to eat," she'd tell me. "Build something that's yours and yours alone." I took that lesson to heart, putting myself through college with scholarships and part-time jobs, then starting my accounting practice instead of joining an established firm. By 30, I had a growing client list and a reputation for meticulous work. My business wasn't just how I made my living, it was my creation, my legacy. Brandon seemed to admire this about me. During our courtship and early marriage, he proudly introduced me as the financial wizard and boasted about my success to his colleagues. He never suggested I should scale back or prioritize differently. But things began to shift subtly after our 3rd anniversary, when conversations about children became more frequent. "Don't you think it's time?" Brandon would ask. "We're not getting any younger." It wasn't that I didn't want children. I just wanted to ensure my business was stable enough to weather my absence during maternity leave. I wanted to hire a second accountant, establish systems that could run without my daily presence. I wanted, in short, to be prepared. "Let's give it another year," I kept saying. "Let me get the firm to a place where it can sustain itself." Brandon grew increasingly frustrated with this answer, though he tried to hide it. "Your business will always need something more," he said one night after we'd had too much wine. "At some point, you have to decide what's really important." The implied dichotomy, that my business and a family were mutually exclusive, stung. But before this tension could reach its breaking point, life intervened in an unexpected way. Eleanor began showing signs of cognitive decline. At first, it was small things: forgetting appointments, telling the same story twice in one conversation, putting her keys in the refrigerator. Brandon dismissed these incidents as normal aging. But when she got lost driving to the grocery store she'd been visiting for 30 years, even he couldn't deny something was wrong. The diagnosis of early onset Alzheimer's hit Brandon like a physical blow. His father had passed away 5 years earlier from a heart attack, leaving Eleanor on her own. Now, facing this degenerative condition, she was truly vulnerable for the first time in her life. "I'm all she has left," Brandon said, his voice breaking. "Her other children live across the country. It's up to me to take care of her." I understood his dedication. It was one of the qualities I loved about him. What I didn't foresee was how this crisis would expose the fault lines in our marriage, revealing expectations I never knew Brandon harbored. When he suggested moving Eleanor into our home, I agreed without hesitation. It seemed like the compassionate choice. Eleanor had always been kind to me, if somewhat reserved, and I couldn't bear the thought of her facing this illness alone. "We'll make it work," I assured Brandon. "We'll hire help when we need it." But Brandon had a different vision in mind, one he didn't fully articulate until Eleanor was already installed in our guest bedroom and her house had been sold. "With your flexible schedule, you can keep an eye on her during the day," he suggested, as if this was the most natural arrangement in the world. "I can take over when I get home from work." That flexible schedule he referred to consisted of client meetings, tax preparations, financial planning sessions, and the countless hours of focused concentration required to run a business. But in Brandon's mind, because I worked from home, 3 days a week my time was somehow more available than his. I tried to make it work. I truly did. I rearranged client meetings around Eleanor's doctor appointments. I installed safety locks on the cabinets and removed the knobs from the stove. I set up a monitor system so I could hear if she called out while I was working in my home office. But the reality of dementia care quickly overwhelmed us both. Eleanor needed constant supervision, not occasional check-ins. She became agitated when left alone. She forgot how to use the bathroom properly. She woke in the middle of the night, convinced intruders were in the house. My business began to suffer. I missed deadlines. I had to reschedule clients repeatedly. During Zoom meetings, I was constantly distracted by the need to listen for unusual sounds from Eleanor's room. "I can't do this anymore," I finally admitted to Brandon after a particularly difficult day when Eleanor had flushed her dentures down the toilet and then accused me of stealing them. "We either need professional help or we need to consider a memory care facility." The look of betrayal on Brandon's face was devastating. "You want to abandon her," he said, his voice cold. "After everything my mother has sacrificed for her family, you want to dump her with strangers." "That's not what I'm saying," I protested. "But neither of us is equipped to provide the care she needs. We're both exhausted and stressed, and she deserves better than what we can give her." The argument might have continued indefinitely if Eleanor hadn't wandered outside during a rainstorm while Brandon was at work, and I was on an important client call. A neighbor found her 3 blocks away, soaking wet and confused. That night, a subdued Brandon finally conceded. "We'll hire someone," he agreed, "but she stays here, with family." Maria's arrival should have resolved the tension. She was experienced, capable, and immediately established a connection with Eleanor. For the first time in months, Brandon and I could breathe without the crushing weight of constant vigilance. My business began to recover. I reconnected with clients I'd been neglecting. The dark circles under Brandon's eyes faded. Our home felt less like a pressure cooker about to explode. But as Eleanor's condition stabilized under Maria's care, I noticed a shift in Brandon's attitude. Rather than gratitude for the professional support that had salvaged our sanity and possibly our marriage, he began to exhibit a strange resentment. "Mom seems to prefer Maria to us," he commented one evening, watching as Eleanor laughed at something Maria said. "She never laughs like that with me anymore." I tried to reassure him. "That's because Maria knows exactly how to engage with her. It's her training and experience, not a personal rejection." But the seed of resentment had been planted, and it grew alongside the financial pressures that mounted when Brandon's company announced its restructuring. The 30% pay cut would be challenging but manageable if we both remained rational about our priorities. Instead, Brandon began to view Maria as a luxury rather than a necessity. He started questioning her methods, second-guessing her expertise, creating tension where there had been harmony. "We don't need to pay someone this much just to keep Mom company," he said during one of our budget discussions. "Between the two of us, we could manage." "Between the two of us" was code for, "you could do this if you really wanted to." It became increasingly clear that in Brandon's mind, my work was dispensable in a way that his was not. The day he fired Maria without consulting me, everything I had tried to ignore about our relationship crystallized into painful clarity. This wasn't just about elder care or financial stress. It was about fundamental respect, or the lack of it. As Brandon packed for his Chicago trip, blithely assuming I would handle the aftermath of his unilateral decision, I realized we had reached an irreversible turning point. The man I married, who had once proudly introduced me as his equal, now expected me to subordinate my entire life to his priorities, without question. I had a choice to make, and Brandon had no idea what was coming. Looking back, I can see the warning signs I ignored. Subtle, at first, then increasingly impossible to dismiss, like watching storm clouds gather on the horizon before a hurricane hits. The morning after Brandon informed me he'd fired Maria, I woke up early. I hadn't slept much, my mind racing with thoughts and plans. Brandon was still asleep, his breathing steady and untroubled. How could he sleep so peacefully after upending our lives? I slipped out of bed and went to check on Eleanor. She was already awake, sitting on the edge of her bed looking confused. "Good morning, Eleanor," I said gently, her eyes narrowed with uncertainty. "Where's Maria?" My heart sank. Eleanor's memory was unpredictable, but she remembered Maria because of their daily routine. The consistency had been an anchor for her. "Maria, we'll be here soon," I lied, not wanting to upset her first thing in the morning. "Let's get you dressed for breakfast." As I helped her with her clothes, I thought about the moment I first noticed Brandon's attitude changing toward Maria. It was about 3 months after we hired her, when Brandon came home from work to find Eleanor napping and Maria watching a Spanish telenovela in the kitchen. "We're not paying her to watch TV," he'd muttered under his breath. "Eleanor's resting," I pointed out. "What exactly do you expect Maria to do? Stare at her while she sleeps?" He didn't have an answer, but his expression spoke volumes. Something about seeing Maria take a moment for herself bothered him deeply. Then there was the birthday party incident. Maria had mentioned that in her experience, dementia patients often responded well to celebrations and music from their youth. She suggested a small party for Eleanor's 72nd birthday, complete with songs from the 1960s and foods Eleanor had enjoyed cooking when her children were young. I thought it was a wonderful idea and helped Maria plan everything. The day was a triumph. Eleanor was more lucid than she had been in weeks, singing along to old Beatles songs and smiling as she recognized the pot roast made from her own recipe. Brandon, however, was oddly reserved throughout the celebration. Later that night, he confronted me in our bedroom. "That wasn't how my mother would have wanted to celebrate her birthday," he said stiffly. "All that music and excitement, it was too much." "Brandon, she had a wonderful time," I pointed out. "Did you see how she lit up when we played Hey Jude? You and Maria are changing everything about how my mother lives," he continued as if I hadn't spoken. "This isn't her life anymore. It's what you two have decided her life should be." I was stunned into silence. The birthday celebration had been one of our best days since Eleanor's diagnosis, yet Brandon could only see it as an intrusion on how things should be, by which he meant how they had always been in the Patterson family. Another incident occurred when Maria suggested we rearrange Eleanor's room. Research had shown that dementia patients often did better with a bed positioned where they could see the doorway, reducing confusion and night terrors. We also removed some decorative mirrors since Eleanor had begun having episodes where she didn't recognize her own reflection and became frightened of the stranger in her room. When Brandon saw the changes, his reaction was immediate and severe. "Why is everything moved around? Those mirrors were from her family home. You had no right." "Brandon, she was having panic attacks because of those mirrors," I explained patiently. "Maria suggested this based on her experience and training." "Well, I don't care what Maria thinks," he snapped. "This is my mother's room, and I want it back the way it was." Despite my protests and Maria's professional explanations about why the changes helped Eleanor, Brandon stubbornly moved everything back that weekend while Maria had her day off. The result was predictable. Eleanor had one of her worst nights in months, waking up screaming at 2 a.m. because she saw an old woman watching her from the mirror. The next day, while Brandon was at work, Maria and I quietly put the room back the way it had been before his interference. Eleanor slept through the night. Brandon never even noticed the change, too absorbed in his own fixed ideas of what was right to see the actual results. These incidents should have alerted me to a fundamental problem. Brandon viewed his mother's care as a matter of maintaining the status quo rather than adapting to her changing needs. In his mind, the past, where Eleanor was the family matriarch who sacrificed everything for her children, was sacred and untouchable, even as Eleanor herself slipped further away from that identity every day. Maria understood what Brandon could not accept: that dementia care isn't about preserving the past but about creating a safe, comfortable present for someone whose experience of reality is shifting. This philosophical divide widened with each passing month. Then came the financial strain. When Brandon's company announced the restructuring and pay cuts, I immediately offered solutions. "I can take on a few more clients," I suggested during our budget discussion. "We'll tighten our spending on non-essentials for a while. We'll be fine." Brandon nodded absently, his eyes fixed on the spreadsheet where Maria's salary stood out as our largest discretionary expense. "Or we could make one big cut instead of a dozen small ones." "Maria is not on the table," I said firmly. "She's essential for your mother's well-being and for our sanity." He dropped the subject that night, but I noticed how he began to track every minute Maria spent on breaks, how he questioned each addition to the grocery list, how he scrutinized the weekly schedule looking for inefficiencies. The tension built gradually, like air pressure before a storm. Maria noticed. She wasn't blind, but she maintained her professionalism, focusing on Eleanor rather than the increasingly cold atmosphere. When Brandon was home, "Mrs. Patterson is having a good week," she reported one evening. She remembered Mr. Patterson's name 3 times today, and she asked about her garden for the first time in months. Instead of being pleased by this progress, Brandon frowned. "What were you doing in the backyard? It's too cold for her to be outside." "We weren't outside, Mr. Patterson," Maria explained patiently. "We were looking at the garden through the window, and the sight of her rose bushes triggered a memory." Brandon made a non-committal sound and left the room, but I could feel his resentment like a physical presence in the house. A week before the final confrontation, I overheard Brandon on the phone with his sister in California. "Karen, this woman is taking over everything," he was saying, his voice low but intense. "Mom looks to her instead of me now, and Melissa acts like Maria walks on water, defending her every time I raise a concern." There was a pause as he listened. "Of course I've tried talking to her, but Melissa's prioritizing her business over family. She always has." Another pause. "No, Maria's not doing anything wrong exactly, but she's changing routines Mom has had for decades, and Melissa just goes along with it because it's more convenient for her work schedule." I stepped away, not wanting to hear more, a familiar knot forming in my stomach. The way Brandon was framing the situation, as if I were choosing my business over his family, as if Maria were some interloper rather than a trained professional helping us all, revealed how deeply our perspectives had diverged. What Brandon couldn't or wouldn't see was that Maria's presence made it possible for me to maintain my business and ensure Eleanor received proper care. Without her, one or both would suffer, and Brandon had made it clear which one he thought should be sacrificed. The day before Brandon fired Maria, there was a final incident that should have prepared me for what was coming. I'd been on a video call with a major client when I heard a crash from the kitchen. Muting my microphone, I called out, "Maria, is everything okay?" No answer. Worried, I apologized to my client and rushed to the kitchen to find Eleanor standing amid shattered plates, looking bewildered. Maria was nowhere in sight. "Eleanor, don't move," I said gently, aware of the broken ceramic that could cut her bare feet. "Where's Maria?" "Who?" Eleanor asked, her eyes vacant. My heart sank. It was one of her bad days. I carefully guided Eleanor to a chair away from the broken dishes and quickly searched the house. I found Maria in the bathroom, clearly ill, her face pale and clammy. "Stomach virus," she managed weakly. "Came on suddenly. I'm so sorry. I just had to run." "Don't apologize," I said immediately. "You're sick. Let me help you to your room." After settling Maria in her quarters with some medication and making sure Eleanor was safe, I returned to my abandoned video call to find the client understandably annoyed. I salvaged what I could of the meeting, but the damage was done. When Brandon came home that evening, I explained what had happened. "So Maria left Mom alone in the kitchen because she felt sick?" he demanded, his tone accusatory. "Brandon, she had to vomit. It wasn't a choice," I tried to reason with him. "These things happen. Maria's human, not a robot." "We're paying for reliable care," he insisted. "If she can't provide that, what are we paying for?" "One incident in 6 months is hardly unreliable," I argued. "You can't possibly expect perfection." But Brandon's mind was already made up. Looking back, I realized he'd been searching for justification to eliminate Maria's position for weeks. This minor, entirely understandable human moment had given him the excuse he needed. The next morning, while I was on an early client call, Brandon went to Maria's quarters. I didn't know what was happening until I heard Maria's voice, shaking, with emotion outside my office door. "Mrs. Reynolds, I would never leave without proper notice. There must be some misunderstanding." I ended my call immediately and opened the door to find Maria standing there, confusion and hurt evident in her expression. Brandon was nowhere to be seen. "What's going on?" I asked. "Mr. Patterson just informed me my services are no longer needed," she said, her professional composure cracking slightly. "He said I endangered his mother yesterday and that I need to be out by Friday." My shock quickly turned to fury. Without a word to Maria, I stormed through the house looking for Brandon, finding him in his home office calmly typing an email as if he hadn't just detonated a bomb in our household. And that brings us back to the confrontation where Brandon revealed not just his decision, but his expectation that I would both clean up his mess with Maria and step into her role without complaint. As I helped Eleanor dress that morning after his bombshell, watching her confusion at Maria's absence, I finally acknowledged what I had been avoiding for months. Brandon and I no longer shared the same vision of our marriage or our future, and one of us was going to have to make a choice that would change everything. The morning Brandon left for Chicago, I made my move. As soon as his Uber pulled away from the curb, I called Maria. "Can you come over?" I asked. "We need to talk." An hour later, Maria sat across from me at our kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, her expression guarded. Eleanor was having a good day, contentedly arranging and rearranging her collection of costume jewelry in the living room where we could see her. "First, I want to apologize for how Brandon treated you," I began. "He had no right to fire you without discussing it with me first." Maria nodded slightly but remained silent, waiting. "I'm not accepting his decision," I continued. "But before I explain what I want to propose, I need to know, would you even consider coming back after how he treated you?" She took a slow sip of her coffee before answering. "Mrs. Reynolds, I've worked with many families dealing with dementia. It's never easy, and people react in different ways. Mr. Patterson is struggling with his mother's condition, and sometimes it's easier to blame the caregiver than to accept the reality of the disease." Her compassion, even toward the man who had fired her unjustly, spoke volumes about her character. "That said," she continued, "I cannot work in a hostile environment. It's not good for me, and more importantly, it's not good for Mrs. Patterson. She senses tension, even when she doesn't understand its source." "I understand completely," I said, "and that's why I'm considering a different arrangement altogether." I laid out my plan. I had spent the night researching options and making calls to contacts in the elder care field. There was an excellent small group home about 20 minutes away, specifically designed for dementia patients. It was run by a geriatric nurse practitioner. I had met through a client, and I had arranged for us to tour the facility that afternoon. If the place is as good as it sounds, I want to move Eleanor there, I explained. And I'd like you to continue as her primary caregiver, but employed by the facility rather than by us. They already have an opening for a care coordinator with your qualifications. Maria's eyebrows rose in surprise. That's very generous, but what about Mr. Patterson? He was adamant about keeping his mother at home. I took a deep breath. Brandon doesn't get to make unilateral decisions about our lives anymore. Not about his mother's care, not about your employment, and certainly not about my career. Maria studied my face. Mrs. Reynolds, are you saying? I'm saying that I'm taking control of this situation before it destroys all of us. Brandon expects me to fire you officially today, and then take over his mother's care myself. He's going to be very surprised when he returns from Chicago. For the first time since I'd known her, Maria looked truly uncertain. This could cause serious problems in your marriage. I gave a hollow laugh. The serious problems are already here. Brandon's decision just forced me to finally face them. We finished our coffee, and I called the agency that had originally placed Maria with us, explaining the situation and ensuring that regardless of what happened with the group home option, Maria would be paid her full contract termination fee plus an excellent reference. Next, I called my sister Rachel. I need a favor, I said when she answered. A big one. Rachel lived about an hour away in a spacious colonial with her husband and 2 teenage sons who were away at boarding school. She'd always had a good relationship with Eleanor, visiting occasionally and sending thoughtful gifts on holidays. Brandon fired Maria and expects me to take over his mother's care, I explained. I'm looking into a memory care facility, but it might take a few days to arrange everything. Could Eleanor stay with you until Monday? Of course, Rachel said without hesitation. But Melissa, what's really going on? This doesn't sound like Brandon. I hadn't shared the growing tension with anyone, maintaining the facade that our household was managing well despite Eleanor's condition. It's a long story, I sighed. The short version is that Brandon's company cut his salary, and he decided Maria was an expense we could eliminate without consulting me. He expects me to handle the fallout and rearrange my entire life to accommodate his decision. Rachel was silent for a moment. And you're not going to do that, are you? No, I said firmly. I'm not. Good, she replied. Bring Eleanor over whenever you're ready. And Melissa? Whatever you decide to do, I'm on your side. Relief washed over me. Having an ally made everything seem slightly less overwhelming. After the call, I began packing a small suitcase for Eleanor. Comfortable clothes, her medications, the photo album she liked to look through even when she couldn't identify everyone in the pictures, and the soft lavender blanket that helped her sleep. Where are we going? Eleanor asked, watching me fold her sweaters. You're going to visit Rachel for a little while, I explained gently. Won't that be nice? Rachel has that beautiful garden you like. Eleanor smiled vaguely. Rachel has flowers, she agreed, though I wasn't sure she fully remembered who Rachel was. As I packed, I thought about the tour scheduled for that afternoon at Oakwood Gardens, the memory care home. If it was as good as my client had described, it could be the perfect solution. A place where Eleanor would receive professional care tailored to her condition, where Maria could continue working with her, and where Brandon would be forced to acknowledge that his mother needed more than either of us could provide at home. But first, I needed to get Eleanor settled at Rachel's, and then pack my own bags. Because regardless of how the Oakwood Gardens tour went, I had made another decision during that sleepless night. I would not be at home when Brandon returned from Chicago. After dropping Eleanor at Rachel's, where she was welcomed warmly and immediately engaged in helping arrange flowers from the garden, I returned home to face the hardest part of my plan. Standing in our bedroom, I looked around at the life Brandon and I had built together. 8 years of marriage contained in shared furniture, pictures on the walls, the reading lamp on his side of the bed that I always complained was too bright. Despite everything, my heart ached at what I was about to do. I pulled out my suitcase and began packing methodically. Enough clothes for a week, important documents, my laptop and work files. As I selected which parts of my life to take and which to leave behind, I felt a strange sense of calm replace the turmoil of the past months. For the first time since Eleanor had moved in, I was taking decisive action rather than simply reacting to one crisis after another. The doorbell rang just as I was zipping up my suitcase. It was Maria, ready to accompany me to tour Oakwood Gardens. The facility exceeded my expectations. Set on 3 acres of landscaped grounds, the Victorian style, home had been converted into a state-of-the-art memory care center while maintaining a warm residential feel. Residents had private rooms but shared bright, welcoming common spaces. The staff-to-resident ratio was exceptional, and their approach focused on maintaining dignity and independence within a secure environment. Most importantly, the director, Dr. Cheryl Watkins, impressed me with her knowledge and compassion. Every resident has individualized care, she explained as she showed us around. We assess cognitive abilities, preferences, and personal history to create daily routines that provide security while still allowing for meaningful engagement. I noticed Maria nodding approvingly as Dr. Watkins detailed their approach to managing sundowning and their policy of integrating family visits into residents' routines. "What about staff positions?" I asked when the tour concluded. I mentioned on the phone that Maria has been caring for my mother-in-law and has a deep understanding of her needs. Dr. Watkins smiled. "We actually have been looking for a care coordinator with experience in private home care. It provides valuable perspective. Maria, if you're interested, I'd love to have you submit an application." By the time we left Oakwood Gardens, I had placed a deposit to hold a room for Eleanor, and Maria had a job interview scheduled for Monday morning. Things were falling into place with a speed that felt almost destabilizing after months of stagnation and conflict. "Thank you," Maria said as we walked to our cars. "Not many people would have gone to such lengths for their caregiver." "You're not just a caregiver," I replied. "You've been a partner in keeping our family functioning during an impossible time. I should be thanking you." We parted with a promise to touch base over the weekend. I drove back to the house, no longer quite feeling like home, to finish what I had started. Inside, I completed packing my things, then sat down at the kitchen table to write a letter to Brandon. I wanted to be clear about why I was leaving, and what needed to change if there was any hope for our marriage. Brandon, by the time you read this, I will have moved Eleanor to Rachel's temporarily and begun arrangements to place her in a memory care facility called Oakwood Gardens. I've also offered Maria a way to continue caring for Eleanor through employment. At this facility, undoing the damage your unilateral decision caused. I am not doing this to hurt you or to abandon your mother. I'm doing it because it is the best solution for everyone involved, especially Eleanor, who deserves professional care that neither of us can provide. I've moved out for now and am staying at the Residence Inn downtown. I need space to think about our marriage and whether it can be saved. When you fired Maria without consulting me and expected me to sacrifice my business to take her place, you revealed how little you respect me as a partner. This isn't just about elder care or finances. It's about the fundamental inequality that has crept into our relationship. I love you, Brandon, but I won't be treated as an afterthought in decisions that affect my life. I won't be expected to sacrifice everything I've built while you sacrifice nothing. And I won't participate in the fiction that we can provide adequate care for your mother without professional help. If you want to talk when you're ready to actually listen, call me. If you still believe your decisions alone should determine our future, then perhaps we've already reached the end. Melissa, I read over the letter twice, making sure it conveyed everything I needed to say without unnecessary cruelty. Then I placed it on the kitchen counter where Brandon would see it immediately upon returning home. As I carried my suitcase to the car, my phone rang. It was Brandon. "Hey, how's everything?" he asked casually. "Did you take care of things with Maria?" The normalcy in his voice, the easy assumption that I had followed his directive without question, strengthened my resolve. "I've taken care of everything," I said, my voice steady. "But not in the way you expected." "What does that mean?" His tone sharpened immediately. "It means you should have consulted me before making decisions that affect all of us. It means I'm not going to be your mother's unpaid caregiver at the expense of my business. And it means you'll find my letter explaining everything when you get home, because I won't be there." Silence stretched between us, taut as a wire. "Where are you going?" he finally asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "And where is my mother?" "Eleanor is safe with Rachel for the weekend. I'm staying at a hotel. When you're ready to have an actual conversation about our future and your mother's care, call me." "You can't just—" he began, his voice rising. "I can and I have," I interrupted. "You gave me no choice when you decided my work, my time, and my opinion didn't matter. Goodbye, Brandon." I ended the call as he was still protesting, then turned off my phone entirely. My hands were shaking, but underneath the anxiety was a bedrock of certainty. Whatever happened next, I had taken back control of my life. As I drove away from the house where I had lived with Brandon for 8 years, I felt a complex mixture of grief, fear, and surprising relief. The breaking point had finally come, not in a dramatic confrontation or tearful ultimatum, but in a series of deliberate choices that said more clearly than any words, "I deserve better than this." The Residence Inn felt both strange and comforting, anonymous yet familiar with its generic artwork and serviceable furniture. I unpacked my suitcase methodically, hanging clothes in the closet as if I might be staying for months rather than what I hoped would be just a few days. After checking in, I had turned my phone back on to find 17 missed calls and 12 text messages from Brandon, their tone evolving from angry demands to confused pleas as the reality of my departure sank in. "What the hell are you doing? You can't just take my mother somewhere without my permission. Answer your damn phone, Melissa. Please call me back. I don't understand why you're doing this. At least tell me where exactly my mother is. I'm coming home early. We need to talk about this." I texted Rachel to warn her that Brandon might show up, then sent him a brief message. "Eleanor is safe with Rachel for the weekend. I am safe at a hotel. I will not discuss anything further until you've read my letter and had time to reflect on it." Then I silenced notifications from him and ordered room service, suddenly realizing I hadn't eaten all day. As I picked at a mediocre salad, I tried to quiet the voice in my head, questioning whether I had overreacted. Was leaving too extreme? Should I have tried one more time to make him understand? But every time those doubts surfaced, I remembered Brandon's dismissive tone when he informed me he'd fired Maria, the casual way he expected me to give up my business, the pattern of disregard that had become our new normal. No, I hadn't overreacted. If anything, I had waited too long to acknowledge how toxic our relationship had become. I spent that first evening away from home catching up on work that had been neglected in the chaos of the past few days. The familiar rhythm of spreadsheets and client reports was soothing, a reminder that this part of my identity remained intact, regardless of the turmoil in my personal life. Around midnight, I checked my phone again. 5 more missed calls from Brandon, plus one from a number I didn't recognize. There was also a voicemail from Brandon's sister Karen, which surprised me since we rarely communicated directly. "Melissa, it's Karen." Brandon called me completely distraught. "He says you've left him and put Mom somewhere? Please call me back. I'm trying to understand what's happening." I sighed, debating whether to respond tonight or wait until morning. Deciding that I owed Karen at least a basic explanation, I texted her, "Karen, I haven't put Eleanor somewhere. She's staying with my sister Rachel temporarily while I arrange for proper memory care. Brandon fired her caregiver without consulting me and expected me to quit working to care for her. I'm taking a stand for everyone's well-being, including Eleanor's. I'll call you tomorrow to explain more fully. Then I took a long shower, trying to wash away the tension of the day, and fell into a surprisingly deep sleep. I was awakened at 7:30 a.m. by persistent knocking at my door. Disoriented, I stumbled out of bed and peered through the peephole to see Brandon standing in the hallway, still wearing his Chicago conference lanyard, his face haggard from what appeared to be a sleepless night. My heart raced. How had he found me? "Melissa, I know you're in there," he called, his voice rough with emotion. The front desk confirmed it. "Please, just talk to me." I rested my forehead against the door, trying to decide what to do. I had planned for more time. Time for him to read the letter thoroughly, to reflect on his actions, to approach our conversation with something other than reactive emotion. But he was here now, and hiding in my room wouldn't solve anything. "Give me 5 minutes to get dressed," I called through the door. I quickly pulled on jeans and a sweater, ran a brush through my hair, and took a deep breath before opening the door. Brandon looked terrible. His normally immaculate appearance was disheveled, dark circles shadowed his eyes, and he hadn't shaved. He stepped toward me as if to embrace me, then hesitated when he saw my expression. "You left," he said, stating the obvious, his voice somewhere between accusation and disbelief. "Yes," I replied simply. "I left." We stood in awkward silence for a moment before I stepped back. "You might as well come in." He entered the room, glancing around at the small kitchenette and sitting area as if they might offer some explanation. "For my actions. I got on the first flight back when I couldn't reach you," he said. "I went home and found your letter, but it doesn't make sense, Melissa. Why would you do this? Why now?" I gestured for him to sit on the small sofa while I took the desk chair, maintaining physical distance between us. "Everything I needed to say was in that letter," I began carefully. "You made a unilateral decision that affected all of us, without any consideration for my input or my life." "This is about Maria?" he asked incredulously. "You left our marriage over a caregiver?" His complete misunderstanding of the situation was so frustrating I almost laughed. "No, Brandon. This isn't about Maria. It's about respect. It's about partnership. It's about you deciding that my business, which I've built over a decade, is dispensable, while your job is untouchable." He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. "We're facing financial pressure, Melissa. I had to make a hard choice." "No, you didn't have to make that choice. We could have found other ways to cut expenses. We could have looked for less expensive care options. We could have done 100 things that didn't involve you making a major decision without even discussing it with me. I am responsible for my mother," he insisted, his jaw tight. "Making sure she's cared for is my duty." "And what about your responsibility to me? To our marriage?" I countered. "Where does that fit in your sense of duty?" He looked genuinely confused. "I don't understand why you're making this into such a big deal. Yes, I should have talked to you before firing Maria. But leaving? Moving my mother without my permission? That's extreme, Melissa." "Without your permission?" I repeated, feeling my temper rise. "Do you hear yourself? Eleanor is not a possession, and I am not your subordinate asking for approval. I made the best choice for everyone involved, including your mother, who deserves professional care we cannot provide." Brandon leaned forward, hands clasped between his knees. "Where is she now? I want to see her." "She's at Rachel's for the weekend, as I told you. She's comfortable and well cared for. On Monday, I have an appointment to complete the paperwork at Oakwood Gardens, a memory care facility that specializes in Alzheimer's patients." His head snapped up. "A facility? You're putting my mother in a home? After you specifically said what?" I interrupted, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. That she should stay with family? That placing her in professional care would be abandoning her? Brandon, those are emotional responses, not practical solutions. Your mother needs specialized care that neither of us can provide. We were managing fine with Maria, he argued. No, we weren't, I countered. Maria was managing fine. We were spectators to her expertise. And the moment you decided to eliminate that expertise, our entire household became unsustainable. He was silent for a moment, staring at the carpet. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. I didn't think it would be that difficult, he admitted. I thought between the two of us we could handle it. Between the two of us, I repeated. But we both know that's not what you meant. You meant me. You expected me to step into Maria's role because in your mind, my work is flexible. Optional even. He didn't deny it, which was both vindicating and heartbreaking. What about this Oakwood place? He asked finally. How much will it cost? About the same as we were paying Maria, actually, I said. They accept long-term care insurance, which your father had the foresight to purchase for both himself and Eleanor years ago. It will cover about 70% of the costs. Brandon looked surprised. I didn't know about that insurance. I know. I found the policy while organizing Eleanor's financial documents last year. I told you about it at the time, but you were distracted with that product launch. He had the grace to look embarrassed. And you've seen this place? It's decent? It's exceptional, I said firmly. It's not a warehouse for the elderly, Brandon. It's a specialized care home with an incredible staff-to-resident ratio, beautiful grounds, and a philosophy centered on dignity and quality of life. A flicker of relief crossed his face, quickly replaced by renewed tension. And where does that leave us? He asked, gesturing between us. I took a deep breath. That depends on whether you understand why I left. This isn't just about Eleanor's care or Maria's firing. It's about a pattern that's developed in our marriage, one where your priorities automatically outrank mine, where your decisions are final while mine are suggestions, where your career is essential while mine is… What? A hobby? Brandon winced. I've never called your business a hobby. You didn't have to say it. Your actions made it clear. He was quiet for a long moment, and I could almost see him wrestling with his pride, trying to find a way to resolve this situation without admitting fault. I'm sorry I fired Maria without talking to you first, he said finally. That was wrong. I was stressed about money and made a snap decision. It was an apology, but a limited one that didn't address the deeper issues. Is that all you're sorry for? I pressed. He looked confused again. What else am I supposed to apologize for? Making tough financial decisions? Caring about my mother? And there it was, the fundamental disconnect. In Brandon's mind, this was still about one isolated incident, not a pattern of disrespect and inequality. I think you should go, I said quietly. What? Melissa, I came all the way back from Chicago. I apologized. What more do you want? I want you to truly understand why I left, I said, feeling suddenly exhausted. Not just acknowledge one mistake, but recognize the pattern. And you're not ready to do that yet. He stood abruptly, frustration evident in every line of his body. This is ridiculous. You're blowing everything out of proportion because of one decision you didn't like. Thank you for proving my point, I said, remaining seated. Go home, Brandon. Think about what partnership actually means. Think about whether you want a wife or an employee, and when you figured that out, we can talk again. So that's it? You're just giving up on 8 years of marriage? I'm not giving up, I corrected him. I'm taking a stand for the kind of marriage I want, one based on mutual respect and shared decision-making. The question is whether that's the kind of marriage you want too. He stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked to the door. With his hand on the knob, he paused. I want to see my mother. Today. Call Rachel and arrange it, I said. She's expecting you. He nodded stiffly and left without another word. As the door closed behind him, I sank back in my chair, emotionally drained. Our first attempt at reconciliation had failed spectacularly, with Brandon unable to see beyond his own perspective to understand the real issues at stake. I wondered if he ever would. After Brandon left my hotel room, I allowed myself 15 minutes to feel the full weight of our failed conversation. Then I pulled myself together and called Maria to update her on the situation. "Mr. Patterson came to see you?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "Yes, and it didn't go well," I admitted. "He still doesn't understand why I left. He thinks I'm overreacting to one isolated incident." Maria was quiet for a moment. "Mrs. Reynolds, there's something I think you should know." Her tone made me sit up straighter. "What is it?" The day before Mr. Patterson fired me, I overheard a phone conversation between him and his sister Karen. I wasn't eavesdropping intentionally. I was bringing Mrs. Patterson's laundry upstairs when I heard them through the open office door. My stomach tightened. "What did you hear?" "He was discussing a job offer in Phoenix. He said it would be a big promotion, but he was concerned about relocating because of his mother's condition. Mrs. Patterson mentioned that she was thinking of moving back to California to live near her older daughter anyway." This was the first I'd heard of any job offer or potential relocation. Brandon hadn't mentioned a word about it to me. "Did he mention me in this conversation?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "He said," Maria hesitated, "he said that you could do your accounting thing anywhere, so that wouldn't be a problem." My accounting thing, my business, my career, my passion, reduced to an afterthought that could be uprooted on his whim. Then, he asked Karen if she thought hiring a full-time caregiver in Phoenix would be too expensive, and she apparently suggested that perhaps you could scale back your work to help with their mother. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Brandon hadn't fired Maria simply to save money during a temporary financial setback. He'd been testing whether I could take over Eleanor's care in preparation for a move I knew nothing about. A move that would require me to abandon my established client base and start over in a new city. "Thank you for telling me this, Maria," I said, my voice strangely calm despite the storm raging inside me. "It explains a lot." After we hung up, I sat perfectly still, processing this revelation. Brandon wasn't just dismissive of my business. He was actively planning a future that would devastate it, without even the courtesy of a discussion. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a calculated strategy. My phone pinged with a text from Rachel. "Brandon just left." He seemed shocked by Mom's condition. I don't think he realized how much Maria was doing. "Call me when you can." I called her immediately. "What happened?" "He showed up looking like death warmed over," Rachel began. "I think he expected to find Mom in some terrible state so he could prove you'd made a mistake. Instead, he found her having a good day. She was helping me arrange flowers and actually remembered his name when he arrived." "How did he react?" "At first, he was just relieved. Then he tried to talk to her about coming home with him, and that's when things got dicey. She got confused and upset, asking where Maria was and why she couldn't stay with the nice lady who helps her. When Brandon tried to explain that Maria doesn't work for them anymore, Mom had a complete meltdown. I winced, picturing Eleanor's distress. Was she okay? Eventually, I had to ask Brandon to leave the room while I calmed her down. He looked shaken. I don't think he fully grasped how dependent Mom has become on routines and familiar caregivers. "Did he say anything about our conversation at the hotel?" Rachel snorted. "Oh, he had plenty to say about that. According to him, you've lost your mind over a simple staffing decision. He kept insisting that between the two of you, taking care of his mother wouldn't be that difficult." "Did he happen to mention anything about a job in Phoenix?" I asked. "Phoenix? No, not a word. Why?" I explained what Maria had overheard. Rachel's shock matched my own. That manipulative jerk, she fumed. So he was planning to uproot you and your business all along? And what? Just spring it on you after making sure you could handle his mother's care? That seems to be the plan, I confirmed. What are you going to do? It was the question I'd been asking myself since Maria's revelation. I'm going to proceed with the Oakwood Gardens placement for Eleanor. It's the right thing for her regardless of Brandon's secret plans. As for Brandon and me, I trailed off, uncertain. You don't have to decide everything today, Rachel said, gently. Give yourself time to think. After we hung up, I did something I'd been avoiding. I called Brandon's sister Karen. If anyone could shed light on his plans, it would be her. She answered on the second ring. Melissa, is everything okay with Mom? Eleanor is fine, I assured her. She's with my sister for the weekend. But I'm calling about something else. Karen, did Brandon tell you he's considering a job in Phoenix? The pause told me everything. I needed to know. He mentioned it, she said cautiously. Why? Because he never mentioned it to me, I replied, keeping my voice even with effort. His wife, the person who would need to uproot her entire business to accommodate this move. Another pause. I assumed he'd discussed it with you, she said, sounding genuinely surprised. He talked about it like it was something you were both considering. Well, he didn't. Just like he didn't consult me before firing Eleanor's caregiver and expecting me to take over her care. Karen sighed heavily. Brandon has always had a blind spot when it comes to, well, seeing things from other people's perspectives. Our father was the same way. That doesn't excuse keeping major life decisions from your spouse, I pointed out. No, it doesn't, she agreed. For what it's worth, I told him he needed to talk to you about the Phoenix job before making any decisions. Obviously, he didn't listen. When did he first mention this job opportunity to you? I asked. About 6 weeks ago, she replied, right after his company announced the salary cuts. 6 weeks. For 6 weeks, Brandon had been planning a potential move that would completely disrupt my life, all without saying a word to me. Thank you for being honest with me, I said. Melissa, Karen hesitated. I know my brother can be self-centered and stubborn, but he does love you. Love without respect isn't enough, I said quietly. But I appreciate you saying that. After ending the call with Karen, I decided I needed to confront Brandon directly about this hidden plan. No more partial truths or manipulative tactics. It was time for complete honesty, however painful. I texted him. We need to talk. I know about the Phoenix job offer. Meet me at Lakeside Park in an hour. I chose a public location deliberately. This conversation would be too emotional for the privacy of my hotel room, and I didn't want to have it at our house, which no longer felt like neutral territory. Brandon was already waiting on a bench by the small lake when I arrived. His expression was guarded, but I detected a flicker of guilt in his eyes. How did you find out? He asked as I sat down beside him, maintaining several feet of distance. Does it matter? The real question is why you kept it from me. 6 weeks? Brandon. 6 weeks of planning a major life change without including me in the conversation. He stared out at the water. I was going to tell you, but the timing wasn't right. With Mom's health declining, and then the salary cut. Those are exactly the kinds of challenges couples are supposed to face together, I interrupted, not reasons to keep secrets from each other. He turned to face me. I wasn't keeping secrets. I was exploring options. The Phoenix position would mean a significant promotion and salary increase, enough to offset what I lost in the restructuring, and then some. And what about my business? The clients I've spent years building relationships with? Did that factor into your exploration at all? Of course it did, he insisted. I thought about how you could expand your practice in Phoenix. It's a growing market with a lot of opportunities. But you never asked me if I wanted those opportunities. You just assumed I would follow your career path, regardless of the cost to mine. Brandon ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I'd seen countless times. Not everything can be a completely equal decision, Melissa. Someone's priorities have to take precedence sometimes. And you automatically assumed yours would, I said, the truth of our fundamental disconnect crystallizing between us. You didn't even give me the chance to be part of the conversation. You're making this into a bigger issue than it is, he argued. I was going to discuss it with you before making any final decisions. When? After you'd fired Maria to test whether I could handle your mother's care? After you'd already mentally committed to the job? After you'd started imagining our life in Phoenix without consulting me? His silence was confirmation enough. And let me guess, I continued. You were planning to suggest that I scale back my business to help care for Eleanor after the move, weren't you? Karen already floated that idea. Brandon's expression shifted from defensive to trapped. It would have made financial sense, he said finally. With my increased salary, you wouldn't need to work as much. Mom would be more comfortable with family care than with strangers. The casual way he dismissed my career as dispensable made my blood boil, but I kept my voice steady. That's where you're fundamentally wrong, Brandon. I don't work just for the money. I built my business because I'm good at it, because I find it fulfilling, because it's part of who I am, just like your career is part of who you are. The difference is, I would never expect you to sacrifice your professional identity for my convenience. That's not fair, he protested. This isn't about convenience. It's about family responsibility. Responsibility that you assumed I would shoulder more than you would, I pointed out. You weren't planning to cut back your hours at this new job to care for your mother, were you? Again, his silence told me everything. Here's what I've realized, Brandon, I said, softening my tone slightly. You and I have fundamentally different views of marriage. I believe in partnership, equal voices, shared decisions, mutual respect for each other's priorities. You believe in something else, a hierarchy where your career, your mother, your preferences naturally outrank mine. That's not true, he argued, but his objection lacked conviction. Isn't it? Be honest with yourself, if not with me. When you think about our future, do you imagine us making decisions together? Or do you imagine making the decisions and me adapting to them? He looked away, unable or unwilling to answer. Your silence is an answer in itself, I said quietly. We sat in silence for several minutes, watching a family of ducks navigate the still water of the lake. The peaceful scene seemed at odds with the turmoil between us. So what happens now? Brandon finally asked. I'm proceeding with the Oakwood Gardens placement for Eleanor, I said firmly. It's the right decision regardless of where either of us lives in the future. Maria will be working there as a care coordinator, so Eleanor will have continuity of care with someone she trusts. Brandon nodded reluctantly. And us? I took a deep breath. That depends on whether we can find a way forward that respects both of us. I won't return to a marriage where my voice doesn't matter, where my career is considered optional, where major decisions are made without my input. What does that mean in practical terms? He pressed. It means we need professional help, marriage counseling with someone who can help us communicate more effectively. It means complete transparency about future plans, including this Phoenix opportunity. And it means a fundamental reset of our expectations about each other's careers and responsibilities. Brandon's expression was unreadable. And if I take the Phoenix job? Then you'll be taking it without me, I said with a certainty that surprised even me. I'm not uprooting my life for a decision I wasn't even consulted on. He flinched as if I'd struck him. You'd end our marriage over this? No, Brandon. If our marriage ends, it won't be because of a job in Phoenix. It will be because you weren't willing to see me as an equal partner with equal say in our shared life. As we sat there with the weight of truth between us, I realized that the revelation of Brandon's hidden plan had done something unexpected. It had clarified exactly what I needed from my marriage and what I was no longer willing to accept. Monday morning arrived with a sense of grim determination. I had an appointment at Oakwood Gardens to finalize Eleanor's placement, and regardless of where things stood with Brandon, I knew this was the right decision for his mother's care. I met Maria in the Oakwood Gardens parking lot. She had her job interview scheduled for after my meeting with Dr. Watkins. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her eyes kind but concerned. "I'm okay," I said, surprised to find it was mostly true. The clarity I'd gained over the weekend had replaced the emotional turmoil with a steady resolve. "How about you? Ready for your interview?" She smiled. "Yes, I toured the facility again yesterday and spoke with some of the staff. This is a good place, Mrs. Reynolds. Mrs. Patterson will receive excellent care here." We walked in together, the beautiful Victorian building welcoming us with its wide porch and well-tended gardens. Inside, the atmosphere was calm but vibrant. Residents engaged in morning activities, staff members greeting them by name, soft music playing in the common areas. Dr. Watkins met us in her office, papers already prepared for my review. We were discussing the particulars of Eleanor's care plan when a commotion in the hallway interrupted us. "I demand to see who's in charge here," a familiar voice boomed. "Brandon." Dr. Watkins raised an eyebrow at me, and I sighed. "That would be my husband. I'm sorry for the disruption." "Family concerns are part of what we deal with every day," she said graciously, rising from her desk. "Let me speak with him." Before she could reach the door, it flew open, and Brandon stormed in, his face flushed with anger. Behind him, a flustered receptionist was apologizing for being unable to stop him. "It's all right, Tammy," Dr. Watkins assured her. "Mr. Patterson, I presume?" "I'm Dr. Cheryl Watkins, director of Oakwood Gardens. I understand you have concerns, but I must ask you to lower your voice. We have residents nearby who are sensitive to disruption." Brandon ignored her, focusing his fury on me. "You're going through with this? After everything I said?" "After everything you said?" I repeated incredulously. "You mean after you revealed you were planning to uproot our entire lives without consulting me? After you made it clear you expecting me to sacrifice my business for your convenience? Yes. I'm going through with providing your mother the professional care she needs." Maria, who had been silently observing, stepped forward. "Mr. Patterson, perhaps we could discuss this somewhere more private." Brandon's eyes widened as he registered her presence. "You're involved in this too? After I fired you?" "I'm here for my job interview," Maria said calmly. "Oakwood Gardens has offered me a position as care coordinator, which would allow me to continue working with Mrs. Patterson during her transition." "This is absurd," Brandon sputtered. "You two are making arrangements behind my back." "Mr. Patterson," Dr. Watkins interrupted, her professional demeanor masking what I suspected was growing impatience. "Nothing has been done behind your back. Your wife is acting as a responsible family member to secure appropriate care for your mother. The documents require both your signatures as next of kin, which is why we scheduled this meeting, to review everything before final decisions are made." Brandon seemed momentarily taken aback by her authoritative tone. He glanced around the well-appointed office, clearly not expecting such a professional environment. "I'd like to see the facility," he said stiffly. "Of course," Dr. Watkins replied. "I'd be happy to give you a complete tour. But first, I must insist that you compose yourself. Our residents deserve a peaceful environment." Something in her calm but firm manner seemed to reach him. He took a deep breath, straightening his tie. "Fine," he agreed. "Show me everything." For the next hour, Dr. Watkins guided us through Oakwood Gardens, explaining their approach to memory care, introducing us to staff members, and showing us the private room that would be Eleanor's if we proceeded with the placement. Brandon remained silent throughout most of the tour, but I could see him taking in details, the cleanliness, the engaged residents, the respectful way staff interacted with even the most confused patients. When we returned to Dr. Watkins's office, his demeanor had shifted from outright hostility to grudging consideration. "The monthly cost?" he asked, getting straight to business. Dr. Watkins outlined the financial details, including how Eleanor's long-term care insurance would cover most expenses. Brandon looked surprised again. He clearly hadn't realized how thoroughly I'd researched everything. "And if we were to relocate," he said carefully with a sidelong glance at me, "would she be able to transfer to another facility?" "Of course," Dr. Watkins replied. "We have relationships with memory care facilities across the country. If relocation becomes necessary, we would work with you to find an appropriate placement and ensure a smooth transition." Brandon nodded slowly. "I'd like some time to think about this." "Certainly," Dr. Watkins agreed. "However, I should mention that we currently have only one room available, and there are other families considering placement. I can hold it for you until Wednesday, but after that, I can't guarantee availability." 2 days is sufficient, I interjected before Brandon could object. "We'll have a decision for you by then." After scheduling another appointment for Wednesday morning, we left Oakwood Gardens, with Maria staying behind for her interview. In the parking lot, Brandon and I faced each other in the bright spring sunshine. "We need to talk," he said. "Properly, this time. Not in a park, not in a hotel room. At home." I hesitated. "I'm not sure I'm ready to come home yet." "Then let's go somewhere else. Neutral territory." He gestured toward his car. "Lunch? There's a place by the river we used to like." The mention of our old favorite restaurant stirred memories of happier times. Sunday brunches where we'd lingered over coffee, planning our future together. It seemed like a lifetime ago. "Okay," I agreed. "I'll meet you there." 30 minutes later, we were seated at a table overlooking the river, an awkward silence between us as we studied our menus with unnecessary concentration. After the server took our orders, Brandon finally spoke. "Oakwood Gardens seems better than I expected," he admitted. "What did you expect? Some grim institution with residents strapped to chairs?" I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "Honestly, something like that," he said. "My mother always talked about nursing homes like they were one step above prison. It's part of why I've been so resistant." I softened slightly. Oakwood Gardens isn't a typical nursing home. It's specifically designed for memory care, with staff trained in the latest approaches. Eleanor would have her own room, personalized care, and activities appropriate for her abilities. "And Maria would be there," he added, surprising me with this acknowledgement. "Yes, assuming she gets the job, which seems likely given her experience." He was quiet for a moment, tracing patterns in the condensation on his water glass. "Why didn't you tell me about the long-term care insurance before?" "I did," I said. "Last year, when I found the policy while organizing Eleanor's papers. You were distracted with work and said we'd discuss it later. We never did." He had the grace to look embarrassed. "I don't remember that." "That's the problem, Brandon. You don't register things that don't align with your predetermined plans. You heard what I said about the insurance, but since it didn't fit your narrative about keeping your mother at home with family, you dismissed it." Our food arrived, creating another pause in the conversation. I picked at my salad without much appetite, waiting to see where he would take the discussion next. "I got offered the Phoenix job officially this morning," he said suddenly. "They want an answer by Friday." I set down my fork. And I don't know what to do," he admitted. "It's a significant opportunity. More money, more responsibility, a chance to rebuild what I lost in the restructuring. But you've made it clear you won't come with me." His eyes met mine directly. "And I don't want to lose you, Melissa." For the first time since this crisis began, I saw genuine vulnerability in his expression. Not manipulation, not strategic emotion, but real fear of losing our marriage. "It's not about Phoenix," I said gently. it's about how decisions are made. Between us. It's about respect. I do respect you, he insisted. No, Brandon, you don't. Not in the way that matters. You respect my intelligence, my competence, even my independence, as long as it doesn't interfere with your plans. But you don't respect my right to equal input on decisions that affect both our lives. He was silent, absorbing my words. Tell me honestly, I continued. Before all this happened, before I left, what did you envision happening with the Phoenix? Job? Walk me through your thought process. He shifted uncomfortably. I thought I'd accept the position. We'd find a good care situation for Mom, maybe a live-in caregiver in our new home. You'd transfer your business, keeping your most important clients remotely and building a new client base in Arizona. And did it occur to you that starting over in a new city might set my business back years? That the relationships I've built with local clients can't simply be transferred? I figured you'd adapt, he said. You're good at what you do. People would find you in Phoenix too. And my input on this major life change? When were you planning to seek that? He hesitated. I was going to present it as an exciting opportunity for both of us. A fresh start in a warmer climate, more financial security, a bigger house. After you'd already decided it was happening, I pointed out. That's not seeking input, Brandon. That's seeking approval for a decision already made. I didn't see it that way, he said, defensive again. That's the problem. You didn't see it from my perspective at all. Just like you didn't consider what firing Maria without consulting me said about how you view my time, my business, my priorities. Brandon pushed his barely touched food away. So where does this leave us? You want me to turn down the Phoenix job? What I want is for you to recognize why this situation has brought us to a breaking point, I explained. It's not about any one decision. It's about a pattern where your priorities automatically outrank mine, where my career, which I've built from nothing, is viewed as flexible and optional, while yours is treated as the family cornerstone. He was quiet for a long moment. I've been like my father, he finally said, surprising me. He made all the decisions in our family. Mom's teaching career ended because he decided it was more important for her to be home with us kids. He relocated us twice for his practice without discussion. I always thought that was just how families worked. This was the first genuine insight I'd heard from him, the first acknowledgement of the pattern he was repeating. That might have been how your parents' marriage worked, I said. But it's not how ours was supposed to work. We promised to be partners, remember? Equal partners. I do remember, he said softly. And I want that again. I want us to find our way back to that. Hope flickered briefly, but I tamped it down. Words were easy. Change was hard. What about the Phoenix job? I asked. I don't know, he admitted. Part of me still wants to take it. It's a good opportunity. But I'm not willing to lose our marriage for it. What would choosing our marriage look like to you? I pressed, needing more than vague declarations. He considered this seriously. It would mean turning down Phoenix for now, finding the best care for Mom, which Oakwood Gardens does seem like it might be the right place, and working on us, maybe with that counseling you mentioned. It was more than I'd expected from him, but I remained cautious. And if another opportunity comes along in the future, some other city, some other job, then we discuss it together, he said. Really discuss it, the pros and cons for both our careers, not just mine. And we make the decision together, or we don't make it at all. I wanted to believe him. After 8 years of marriage, walking away would be devastating. But staying in a relationship where I was perpetually second class would be worse. I need time, I said finally. This isn't something we can resolve over one lunch, but I'm willing to continue the conversation. Relief washed over his face. That's all I'm asking for, a chance to make this right. As we prepared to leave the restaurant, Brandon reached across the table and tentatively took my hand. Will you come to Oakwood Gardens with me on Wednesday? He asked. To make the final decision about Mom's care together? It was a small step, but a significant one. His acknowledgement that this decision should be made jointly. Yes, I agreed. I'll meet you there. We walked to our separate cars, the future of our marriage still uncertain, but with the first fragile bridge beginning to form across the chasm between us. What neither of us realized was that the most dramatic confrontation still awaited us. One that would force Brandon to choose definitively between his old patterns and the possibility of a truly equal partnership. Wednesday morning dawned clear and crisp, a perfect spring day that felt symbolic somehow, a fresh start after the emotional storms of the past week. I had spent the intervening time since our lunch continuing to stay at the hotel, using the space to think clearly about what I wanted from my marriage and what I was no longer willing to accept. I arrived at Oakwood Gardens 15 minutes early for our appointment, intending to center myself before Brandon arrived. To my surprise, his car was already in the parking lot. Inside, the receptionist directed me to the garden courtyard, where she said my husband was waiting. I found Brandon sitting on a bench beneath a flowering cherry tree, deep in conversation, with an elderly woman who was pointing out various plants and flowers with animated gestures. It took me a moment to realize the woman was one of the residents. Her blue cardigan matched those worn by several other seniors I'd seen during our tour. Brandon was listening intently, nodding and asking questions as if he were receiving expert gardening advice rather than the somewhat disjointed observations of someone with cognitive decline. The gentleness in his manner struck me. This was the man I had married. The man who could be remarkably kind and attentive when he wasn't blinded by his own agenda. He looked up and saw me watching them. "Melissa," he called, smiling. "Come meet. Mrs. Abernathy. She's been teaching me about the garden." I approached and introduced myself to the elderly woman, who beamed at me before continuing her botanical lecture. After a few minutes, a staff member came to remind Mrs. Abernathy about her morning art class, and she tottered off happily, leaving Brandon and me alone beneath the cherry blossoms. "You're early," I observed, sitting beside him on the bench. "I wanted to spend some time here before making the final decision," he explained. "To see how it feels on an ordinary day, not just during a guided tour." And he gestured around at the peaceful garden, the residents walking with caregivers or sitting in small conversational groups. "It feels right. Better than I expected. More like a community than an institution." I nodded, relieved by his assessment, but still wary after the emotional whiplash of the past week. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," Brandon continued, turning to face me directly, "about respect and partnership and how I've been making decisions without truly considering your perspective." And you're right," he admitted, the words clearly difficult for him. "I've been operating from my father's playbook, assuming that as the husband, my career and my choices should automatically take priority. I didn't even realize I was doing it until you forced me to see the pattern." It was a more direct acknowledgement than I had expected, but I remained cautious. Recognizing the pattern is one thing, changing it is another. "I know," he agreed. "That's why I called Griffin Hawkins yesterday." Griffin Hawkins was a renowned Phoenix-based executive who had been recruiting Brandon aggressively for the position there. The fact that Brandon was mentioning him now sent a flutter of anxiety through my stomach. "What did you tell him?" I asked, working to keep my voice neutral. Brandon took a deep breath. "I told him I was declining the position." I stared at him, genuinely surprised. "You turned it down? Without using it as a negotiating tactic with me?" "Yes," he said simply. "I realized something important. If I took that job under these circumstances, without your full participation in the decision, knowing it would damage your business and our marriage, I'd be repeating the exact pattern that brought us to this breaking point. Even if I somehow convinced you to come with me, the resentment would poison everything." I was speechless. This was a significant sacrifice from a man who had always prioritized his career advancement. But that's not all, he continued. I also told my current company that I need to adjust my travel schedule, fewer overnight trips, more predictable hours, to help manage my mother's care and to invest in repairing my marriage. My boss wasn't thrilled, but she agreed to work with me on a more sustainable schedule. These were concrete actions, not just promises or temporary concessions to win me back. For the first time since this crisis began, I felt a glimmer of genuine hope. "Thank you," I said softly. "That couldn't have been easy for you." "It wasn't," he admitted, "but losing you would be infinitely harder." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the past week settling between us along with the possibility of a different future. "I've scheduled our first marriage counseling appointment," Brandon added, surprising me again. "For next Tuesday evening, if that works with your schedule. The therapist specializes in couples navigating caregiving challenges." "You did research," I observed, impressed despite myself. "I did. And I found someone who accepts our insurance and has excellent reviews. But if you don't like her approach, we can find someone else." The fact that he was not only taking initiative but also leaving room for my input represented exactly the kind of partnership I had been asking for. "Tuesday works for me," I agreed. Before we could continue our conversation, Dr. Watkins appeared in the garden doorway, waving to indicate she was ready for our appointment. Together, we walked back into the building, a united front for, perhaps, the first time in months. The meeting went smoothly. We reviewed Eleanor's individualized care plan, signed the necessary paperwork, and scheduled her move-in for the following Monday. Maria, who had indeed been offered and accepted the care coordinator position, would be directly involved in Eleanor's transition and ongoing care. As we were preparing to leave Dr. Watkins's office, Brandon asked the question I had been expecting, sooner or later. "When will you come home?" I had been considering this carefully during my days at the hotel. "I'd like to return after Eleanor moves to Oakwood Gardens," I said. "I think we both need these few days to adjust to the new reality and prepare for her transition." He looked disappointed, but nodded. "I understand. Can we at least have dinner together tonight, to start rebuilding?" "I'd like that," I agreed. We were walking toward the parking lot when Brandon's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and frowned. "It's my sister," he said, answering the call. I watched his expression change from mild annoyance to shock as Karen spoke. "When?" he asked sharply. "Is she—" "I see. Yes, we'll come right away." He ended the call and turned to me, face pale. "It's Mom. Rachel took her to lunch at that cafe she likes and she had some kind of episode. They're at St. Luke's emergency room now." My heart sank. "Is she okay?" "They think it's a TIA, a mini-stroke." Karen caught an early flight when she heard about everything happening with Mom. She met them at the hospital. We hurried to our cars, agreeing to meet at St. Luke's as quickly as possible. The emergency room was chaotic as always, but Rachel spotted us immediately and waved us over to where she sat with Karen, whom I had only met a few times at family gatherings. "How is she?" Brandon asked without preamble. "Stable now," Karen replied, standing to hug her brother briefly. "The doctor says it was definitely a TIA. They're running more tests, but they want to keep her overnight for observation. Can we see her?" I asked. Rachel nodded. "They said family can go in briefly, 1 or 2 at a time." Brandon turned to me. "You should go first," he said, surprising both Karen and Rachel. "She responds well to you." This simple acknowledgement that my relationship with Eleanor had value independent of my status as Brandon's wife touched me deeply. I followed a nurse to Eleanor's curtained alcove, where she lay looking small and fragile against the white hospital sheets. Her eyes were closed, but they fluttered open when I took her hand. "Hello, dear," she said, her voice slightly slurred but intelligible. "Hi, Eleanor. How are you feeling?" She considered this carefully. Tired. Where's Maria? Maria isn't here. Right now, but Brandon and Karen are outside. They'll come see you in a few minutes. She nodded, then squeezed my hand with surprising strength. Don't let him bully you, she said suddenly, her eyes clearer than they had been in weeks. Who? I asked, startled. Brandon, she replied. He's like his father. Thinks he knows best for everyone. I should have stood up more. Don't make my mistake. I was stunned by this moment of lucidity and insight from a woman who often couldn't remember what day it was. I won't, I promised. Eleanor smiled and closed her eyes again, apparently exhausted by the effort of this brief exchange. When I returned to the waiting area, I debated whether to share Eleanor's surprising statement with Brandon. Before I could decide, a doctor approached our group. Family of Eleanor Patterson? She asked, and we all nodded. I'm Dr. Rivera. Your mother is stable, but this TIA is concerning given her underlying dementia. It indicates vascular issues that could lead to more serious strokes. Her cognitive function may decline more rapidly now. Brandon paled. What are you saying exactly? I'm saying that your mother's condition is more precarious than it might have appeared, Dr. Rivera explained gently. The memory care placement you mentioned to the admitting nurse is exactly what she needs at this point. Skilled staff who can monitor for these vascular events and respond quickly. Karen, who had been skeptical about the Oakwood Gardens placement based on our earlier phone conversation, looked shaken. You really think she needs that level of care? Without question, Dr. Rivera confirmed. Home care would be inadequate, given these new developments. After the doctor left, Karen turned to Brandon. I owe you both an apology, she said quietly. When Brandon first told me you wanted to place Mom in a facility, I thought you were taking the easy way out. I didn't understand the severity of her condition. You couldn't have known, I assured her. You live across the country and haven't seen the daily reality. Still, she insisted, I encouraged Brandon to resist the idea, and that clearly made a difficult situation worse for everyone. I'm sorry. Brandon put his arm around his sister. We all want what's best for Mom, he said. And now we know for sure that Oakwood Gardens is the right choice. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Eleanor was discharged from the hospital, and we brought her back to our home for her final weekend with us before the move to Oakwood Gardens. Maria came by daily to help with her care and to continue building the relationship that would ease Eleanor's transition. Brandon and I had dinner together each night, carefully rebuilding our connection through honest conversations about everything from Eleanor's care to our marriage to our respective career goals. We didn't agree on everything, but for the first time in longer than I could remember, we were truly listening to each other. The morning of Eleanor's move-in day, I checked out of the hotel and drove home, truly home, with my suitcase and the accumulated belongings from my week away. Brandon was in the kitchen making coffee when I walked in. Welcome back, he said, his smile cautious but genuine. It's good to be back, I replied, and meant it. Together, we helped Eleanor pack her favorite possessions for Oakwood Gardens, family photos, the quilt her mother had made, books she still enjoyed looking at even when she couldn't follow the stories. The three of us drove to the facility together, Maria meeting us at the entrance to help with the transition. As we settled Eleanor into her new room, decorating it with familiar items and introducing her to the staff who would be caring for her, I watched Brandon interacting with his mother, patient, gentle, fully present in a way he hadn't been during the chaos of trying to manage her care at home. This is a nice room, Eleanor said, running her hand over the comfortable armchair we had positioned by her window. Am I visiting someone? This is your new home, Mom, Brandon explained, as we had several times already. Remember? We talked about you living here where people can help take care of you. She frowned briefly, then her expression cleared. Will Maria be here? Right on cue, Maria stepped forward, Yes, Mrs. Patterson. I'll be here every day to visit with you. This seemed to satisfy Eleanor, who nodded and continued exploring her room with childlike curiosity. After making sure she was comfortably settled and engaged in an afternoon activity with other residents, Brandon and I left Oakwood Gardens together. In the parking lot, he took my hand. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For not giving up on me when I was being impossible, for forcing me to see what I was doing to our marriage, for finding the right place for Mom when I couldn't see past my own preconceptions." I squeezed his hand. "We still have a lot of work to do." "I know," he agreed. "But for the first time in months, I feel like we're on the same team again." As we drove home, separately, since we had both brought our cars, I reflected on the unexpected justice of how everything had unfolded. Brandon had been forced to confront his assumptions about gender roles and caregiving. I had found my voice and set clear boundaries about what I would and wouldn't accept in our marriage. Eleanor was receiving the professional care she needed, and Maria, unjustly fired, had landed in a position even better suited to her skills and compassion. The consequences of Brandon's unilateral decision had ultimately led to better outcomes for everyone involved, though not in the way anyone could have predicted. That evening, as we shared a quiet dinner at home, Brandon raised his glass in a toast. "To new beginnings," he said. I clinked my glass against his. "And to equal partnerships." He nodded, the lesson finally, truly learned. "Equal partnerships," he echoed. "Always." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.